The office was unusually silent that evening. Desks sat empty, except for the glow of computer screens left behind by coworkers eager to clock out. I remained at mine, fingers flying over the keyboard as I raced to finish a report. Deadlines always had a way of sneaking up, and tonight was no exception. "Still here?" The voice startled me. I turned to find my boss, Mr. Donovan, standing beside my desk. His tie was loosened, sleeves rolled up, a rare sight for someone usually so put together. He looked tired, yet his smile was warm. "I just have a few more things to wrap up," I replied. "Come by my office when you're done," he said, his tone softer than usual. "I need to go over something with you." I nodded, my heart skipping a beat. There was something different in his voice, not the usual authority of a boss giving instructions, but something gentler. Determined to finish quickly, I wrapped up my work and headed to his office. The door was slightly ajar, so I knocked. "Come in," he called. Inside, his office felt different that night. Quieter, almost intimate. The warm glow of the desk lamp softened the space, and the faint scent of his cologne lingered in the air. He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion visible in his eyes, though they remained kind. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. We discussed the project for a while, but I could sense something else on his mind. His gaze drifted, thoughtful yet not uncomfortable. "You know," he said after a brief pause, "I don't say it enough, but I really appreciate your hard work. You're dedicated, and honestly, I rely on you more than I probably should." His words caught me off guard. "Oh, thank you," I managed, unsure how to respond. He smiled. Not the usual polite kind, but something softer, almost personal. "I know I can be difficult to work with sometimes," he admitted. "You're not that bad," I teased, earning a quiet chuckle from him. After that, the conversation shifted. We talked about late nights at the office, frustrating clients, and even personal stories. He shared things I never imagined he would. Details from his younger years, moments of uncertainty, choices that led him here. "I never actually planned to end up in this job," he confessed. "Life has a funny way of changing your path." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of closeness. A comfortable silence settled between us until I reached for my coffee cup, only to knock it over, spilling its contents across my papers. "Oh no!" I gasped, scrambling to contain the mess. "Here," he said quickly, grabbing a handful of tissues. He knelt beside me, blotting at the spill, and for a fleeting second our hands brushed. The moment lingered. Too long, too noticeable. I froze, my heart hammering. "Sorry," I murmured, pulling away. "It's okay," he said softly, his gaze locking onto mine. There was something in his eyes, something unspoken yet impossible to ignore. I left his office that night feeling more confused than ever. My thoughts tangled long after I stepped into the cold evening air. The following days felt different. The memory of that night stayed with me, the way his eyes lingered, the brief touch that sent my heart racing. I tried convincing myself it was nothing, yet I found myself watching him more closely during meetings, noticing small things. The way he ran his fingers through his hair when he was stressed, the rare smile he gave when someone cracked a joke. Then, one evening as I was packing up to leave, his voice stopped me again. "Do you have a minute?" he asked, standing in the doorway of his office. I hesitated before nodding. Inside, the atmosphere felt calmer than before. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "I know things have been hectic," he began, "but I wanted to say, I've noticed how much you've taken on lately. I don't know how I'd manage without you." His words took me by surprise, but before I could respond, he sighed. "You ever feel like you're just going through the motions?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "Yeah," I admitted softly. "All the time." He exhaled, as if relieved by my answer. "Sometimes I forget what I'm even working toward. Feels like I'm just chasing deadlines." For the first time, he didn't sound like my boss, just someone tired, searching for something more. "I get that," I said. It's hard when everyone expects you to have it all together. His expression softened. That's why I admire you, he said. You make it look effortless. I let out a quiet laugh. I promise it's not. The conversation shifted again, this time to life outside of work. He spoke about his family, how distant he felt from them, how his job often left him feeling isolated. I guess that's why I spend so much time here, he admitted. It's easier to stay busy than face the quiet. He nodded. I know what you mean. Some nights, I sit in my apartment and wonder if I'm doing enough, or if I'm just letting time pass me by. His eyes darkened slightly with understanding. It's strange, he said, voice quieter. But I feel like you're the only person I can really talk to. The words lingered in the space between us, heavy yet comforting. You know, he added after a moment, I never thought someone 8 years younger would understand me better than anyone else. I smiled gently. Age doesn't always matter. His gaze held mine, steady, warm, filled with something I couldn't quite name. I should let you go, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. You've had a long day. I stood, but just as I reached the door, he spoke again. I'm glad we talked. Me too, I replied, my heart lingering long after I walked away. Days passed, yet his words stayed with me. The way he said I understood him better than anyone else echoed in my mind. I tried to push the thoughts away, but the way he looked at me, that quiet, searching gaze, made it impossible to ignore. Then, one afternoon, as I was finishing up reports, a message from him popped up on my screen. Can you stop by my office before you leave? I stared at the words, my pulse quickening. Something about this felt different. When I walked in, he was pacing near his desk, clearly unsettled. I'm sorry for pulling you away, he said, his voice quieter than usual. I need to get something off my chest. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I've been trying to ignore this for weeks now, but I can't anymore. He took a slow breath, meeting my eyes. I care about you more than. I know I shouldn't feel this way. The office, the age gap. I know it's not ideal, but I can't keep pretending it isn't there. His words hit me harder than I expected. Part of me had sensed it, but hearing him say it made it real. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. I don't want this to make things awkward, he added quickly. If you don't feel the same, I understand. I couldn't keep acting like nothing's changed. For a moment, I couldn't find the right words. My mind raced with memories, late nights, quiet conversations, and that feeling I had been trying so hard to ignore. I don't know what to say, I admitted. You don't have to, he said gently. I just needed to be honest with you. The air between us felt heavier, yet his gaze remained steady. It's not that I don't feel something, I said carefully. I don't know if it's right. He nodded slowly. I get that. I've been telling myself the same thing. Silence stretched between us, neither of us sure what to say next. I think I just need some time, I finally said, to figure out how I really feel. I understand, he said with a faint smile. Take all the time you need. I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, his voice stopped me. Whatever happens, I just want you to know that you mean a lot to me. There was no pressure in his words, just sincerity. Thank you, I whispered, unable to stop the small smile that formed as I walked away. The following week passed in a blur. I kept my distance, unsure how to act. Every time I walked past his office, I could feel his gaze on me. Yet he never called me in, never pushed for an answer. The space he gave me only made things harder. I couldn't stop thinking about him. One evening, as I walked home alone, my thoughts tangled. I replayed his words, how genuine they had sounded. His feelings weren't impulsive. They ran deeper than that. He wasn't just my boss. He was someone who saw me, understood me, and somehow made me feel less alone. The next day, I knew I had to talk to him. When I reached his office, the door was closed, but light spilled from beneath it. I hesitated, then knocked. Come in, he called. He looked surprised to see me but masked it quickly. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I've been thinking," I started, unsure of how to say what was on my mind. "About what you said." His expression turned serious, but he didn't interrupt. "I won't pretend I haven't felt something too," I admitted. But I was scared of what it could mean, of how complicated things might get. His eyes softened, a flicker of hope behind them. "I get that," he said. "I've been scared too. I don't know what this should look like," I confessed. "But I know I don't want to ignore it anymore." A small, genuine smile touched his lips. "I don't want to rush anything," he said. I want to know you better. Beyond deadlines and meetings." Relief washed over me as I nodded. "I'd like that." We agreed to meet for coffee that weekend, somewhere away from the office. When the day arrived, I walked into the cafe and found him already there, waiting. The moment he saw me, he smiled. An easy, warm smile that put me at ease. Conversation flowed effortlessly. He talked about his favorite books, his love for cooking, and how he once spent an entire vacation trying to teach himself the guitar. I laughed more that afternoon than I had in weeks. By the time we left, the air was crisp and cool. We walked side by side, our hands brushing every so often. This time, neither of us pulled away. "I'm glad you came," he murmured. "Me too," I said. We stood there for a moment, the city lights flickering in the distance. Then, without overthinking, I reached for his hand, lacing my fingers through his. His grip tightened slightly, warm, steady. "I don't know where this will go," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Neither do I," he said. "But I'm not going anywhere." We stood together in the quiet, the world moving around us, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be.